So as I said, we just finished watch Mangoes from the Valley, and I want to introduce Rene King, the actor, and Aryana Mohammed, the director. We'd just like to hear from you all, your motivation and intention in creating this piece of work.
All right, hi everyone, good evening. I assume you can hear me, yes?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. So hi everyone. Hi Aryana.
Hi.
This was, I think, a really special project for both Aryana and myself. Initially, it was brought to us to be done as a part of theater, and eventually we were able to film it. So before I speak, I would like Aryana to give us a basic synopsis of the project and how we went about creating this piece.
Okay, hi, good night, everyone. I'm Aryana Mohammed, and I wrote and directed the piece. So what initially happened was that Marcus Waldron, another theatre practitioner, along with Albert Smith, who is one of the Venezuelan people that immigrated here. He's also an actor, and they came together and they formed the Micro Theatre Festival of Trinidad and Tobago. And through their idea, they got a number of people on board. And for the first festival, the idea was to create 15-minute short pieces that captured the Venezuelan experience in Trinidad. Some pieces would have looked at xenophobia, probably as well, I believe, the journey of coming here and crossing, the Bocas del Dragon. And my piece was a little different. As a woman, you're conscious of a lot of things. And I had heard about a number of stories where women came here and they were engaging in sex work. Some were doing it voluntarily, of their own free will, as a way to supplement their income, because obviously they were not making a lot of money because they were not legal here. And they obviously wanted to send money back home to support their family. Some people, they came here and they came here under false pretenses, where people would have promised them certain jobs and, assistance. And when they came here, they realized that what it is was not what they signed up for. So the idea about the piece is to really capture the experiences of both of those women, because whether you engage in something willingly or unwillingly doesn't matter, but there's always risks to the profession itself. And when that is one of the risks, because it's not regulated in Trinidad and Tobago, it's not legal here. So these women, even though they're engaging and they're doing that, they have no protection against, all the forces that may be. And so both women are exposed to being abused, physically, mentally, sexually, specifically. And so we really, that's what it is I wanted to highlight about the experience, because it's something that is not talked about as much. We see a lot of newspaper articles talking about them coming here, coming in through Cedras, coming through our ports. How do we curb this wave of Venezuelan migrants coming into our ports? So we've seen that, but we haven't seen the plights of these people, specifically of these women who come here just seeking a better life, trying to seek refuge and get away from very hard life and a hard place, somewhere none of us would want to be. and the perils that they face here. So that was the intention. And it kind of took off from there. I personally, I conceived of the piece, I didn't want it to have any words. I don't think there's any words that can describe somebody who has had the experience. They have no words to describe their experience about their, being a victim of assault, mental and physical abuse. The thing is, we can always try to describe and we can always try to put it into words, but I do not think there are words to really describe what that person feels in that moment. And so that's where my mind was at, that there were no real words, and I just wanted the audience to have a visceral experience, to have. You said something? Sorry, it just broke up.
Yes, I was just telling you, thank you for sharing that, the intention behind the film and why the and elements that were put in there were there. I want to go across quickly to Rene, right? Because we had quite a delay, so we want to move ahead a little quickly. But thank you again, Aryana. And again, Aryana is the director of the film Mangoes from the Valley, and we'll now be hearing briefly from the actor herself, Rene King.
All right, so good evening again, everyone. This experience was very, I would say, very enlightening. I don't think, as Aryana would have said, it's a story that a lot of people pay mind to. I think we are a very judgmental society, and whether it be sexual abuse, whether it be mental, emotional, or physical abuse, I think it's something that we just don't speak about enough. So highlighting those issues in the film, it stuck with us. I would say it stuck with me quite a bit. And it was very enjoyable, I would say, to embark on the experience of telling a story, one that I have not thankfully experienced personally. But I would say it's given voice in a different way to trauma, and also to allow, just society to understand that judgment really doesn't progress our nation, because we judge these women or these victims and we don't see them as victims. And I think having to step into that role, it really allowed for me to step into that role mentally. And I think if a lot of persons, even if they never, create a film like this, or they never embark on that journey in any way, I think if you can step into the shoes of someone else, it really does allow you to have an appreciation for the life that you have. And it also brings a level of awareness that you won't judge someone based on decisions they make or who they are in society, because we never know what anyone faces. But most times it's that a lot of people don't have a voice to speak about what they are going through, whether it be sexual, emotional, mental, physical, whatever type of abuse you're being faced with. So as it pertains to gender-based violence, women have, a varying amount of things coming against them. And, there will be a plaster that they put on it and they say, well, just suck it up. Or, and I think being able to tell the story to say that because you can't judge a person, you don't know what they have to face or what they have to go through. And I think it was a strong story to tell, and I'm glad we were able to. It allowed for me to embark on some personal, I would say personal work, internal work, to start working on the piece. And I thank Aryana and Daniel and all who would have contributed for allowing us that space to create something and then put it into a film. So even this platform, it's a pleasure to be here and to be able to share this space to discuss these issues. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Rene. Thank you very much for that. We want to head into our discussion about gender-based violence. But before I do that, let me just again introduce myself, because we may have, some people now coming on. So my name is Greene-George. I am the chairperson of CIWiLTT, and you are viewing Conversations on Gender-Based Violence. We are in the middle of our 16 days of activism campaign, so mandated by the United Nations. And this is geared towards ending gender-based violence across the globe. We're heading into our discussion now, and I want to introduce our panelists. We have Officer Mills, and we also have Mauriska. As I'm looking around, hi Mauriska, we have Mauriska Thomas. I'm going to be just reading their bios, after which they'll introduce themselves, and we'll start the discussion tonight. So we have Miss Mauriska Thomas, and she's a former student of the University of the Southern Caribbean, where she graduated as an honor student with her Bachelor of Science in Psychology. She's also an avid writer for the Tobago Newsweek. She writes articles which address social issues. In addition, Mauriska is a conflict resolution coach where she trains individuals in understanding different aspects of themselves and their lifestyle choices, which may be contributing factors to various conflicts they experience in their daily life, all while equipping them with tools to navigate these challenges. She also facilitates individuals resolving office, personal, and school conflicts that may occur. Welcome, Mauriska Thomas. Next, we have Nana Hesss-Bayne. She is one of the directors of CIWiL, that's Caribbean Women in Leadership Regional NGO. And she's the founder and executive director of SHIDA Sustainable Development Solutions Limited. Professionally known by her middle name, Nana, she is a social economist and gender expert with over 21 years of international experience acquired in the Caribbean, Africa, and the United Kingdom and the Americas. To her, it is a unique pleasure to affect the lives and advocate on behalf of persons who want to advance change in their countries, communities, and institutions. She has a master's in economic and social studies in management development. She specializes in poverty reduction and sustainable livelihoods from the University of Wales, UK. And she also has 2 Bachelor of Arts degrees in economics and French with a minor in pre-law from the Indiana University of Pennsylvania. She's a director of Myrtle Place, which is a domestic violence shelter in Trinidad and Tobago, and she serves as the regional board coordinator / secretary for Caribbean Women in Leadership. Welcome, Nana. We also have in August and 4. He has served as a police motorcyclist up to 2005 before becoming a detective at the Child Protection Unit, which now forms part of the Special Victims Department, Tobago Division. We welcome Officer Mills with us this afternoon. Without any further ado, we just want to get into the discussion. And we're here to discuss gender-based violence, what it is, what you think it is, what exactly is, some of the consequences and more. But we just want to open up the floor to the panelists, Director Nana, Mauriska Thomas, and Officer Mills, to just give us your feelings in terms of the film and the topic that we're discussing this evening. What did you get from it? How did it move or touch you? Director Nana, do you like to go first? Would you like to go first?
Feel free to call me Sister Nana, no problem at all,
Okay.
Right? It was quite traumatic watching the movie and hearing the actress and the director talk about their visualization and concept for presenting the movie explained a lot. really what was being shown cannot be described in words. It was painful to watch in a way, certain parts of it. That also tells us the pain and the trauma that persons who are involved in gender-based violence have to experience. The survivor's whole ordeal, the feelings about self, you could see that, you know, wherever the only solace where she was getting was in eating a mango. And life on a daily basis throughout, or what was shown, was just painful. That's my observations for now. And I'll let the others speak.
Well, for me, it is indeed traumatic. And, you know, from the police perspective, we never really get the chance to see an issue or a matter of gender-based violence actually happening. The police actually come in after, you know, the fact, and a report is made, and, you know, we conduct our investigation and bring perpetrators before the court and so on to answer according to law. But seeing it firsthand, even though it's a film, it actually speaks to what persons, you know, would have gone through or actually are going through at this point in time. And it's a really awakening up experience for me as a police officer, and for anyone else that's in the actual business, you know, of the law, and listening or having to listen to persons explaining from their perspective what they would have gone through, you know, as a victim of gender-based violence. And it speaks so much to the fact that, you know, gender-based violence and domestic violence is actually real, and it affects everybody. And I'm happy to be, you know, a part of the panel this afternoon, this evening, and to see a film, you know, that depicts gender-based violence, you know, in all its circumstances and so on. So it's awakening for me to be a part of this and to see what persons actually go through.
For me, the film was quite an eye-opener for the fact that it was, even without words, it was able to clearly transmit the message of the victim having no autonomy over self. And you saw when she came back home every day, she was spitting, so she was telling us she was feeling disgusted by the act that she had to do. You could see while the act was happening, she called on her religious faith. And when she was looking to leave, she threw the necklace, which to me said that even that while she was going through the event, she pulled on it, but nothing happened. So after that, she felt as though she didn't have hope. That is what it transmitted to me. That a lot of persons going through these things, they may feel hopeless. They may not have the resources to leave, because she left home, she packed up everything, whatever little she had, which is when persons come over, migrants come over, they don't really have much. So she picked up whatever little she had in an attempt to leave. But she came back because the resources are so little or non-existent that she was not able to even get out of her situation. Yeah. So a lot of migrants are experiencing, not just migrants, but generally persons who are victims of gender-based violence. A lot of them are in some depressing situations. And though some persons may look okay, they are really not doing well. That is what stood out for me.
Thank you for that, panel. I would agree. Everything that was shared, I think we all felt it collectively. And it's, you know, it's amazing that everybody had something different that they felt and that they got from seeing it. And that's the power of art, to bring a story to you, and that you now feel and see and understand something different than the person who's sitting right next to you looking at it. I want to bring this question to the fore, because a lot of times when we talk about gender-based violence, people assume that you understand, or that the person talking about it understands what they're discussing. So I just want to start with a very basic question. What is gender-based violence?
Right. So gender-based violence is basically when an individual is being targeted for a particular violent act based solely on the fact of their gender. So let's take in society now we have the issue of patriarchy. A lot of people they go in on that topic, right? And we see that a lot in places like India, where they tend to view men as being superior to women. So in that case, women are now targeted because a lot of men know that if they do anything, nothing will happen to them. So women in India tend to experience a lot of rape, a lot of other violent acts. Let me just put it like that. But there aren't systems in place to assist them adequately because of how society views women in that region.
In addition to that, gender-based violence is disproportionate, meaning there's always it is not fair. There's always the stronger person or the perpetrator preying or attacking the weaker one. Normally, if you have a normal report, two guys would have had an argument or disagreement. That would be two men. But in gender-based violence, it's actually the stronger versus the weaker, and that's what we have been seeing, within the police service. Majority of the reports coming into our office, it's the male versus the female. The male is attacking the female, perpetrating violent acts against the female, and so on. But nevertheless, we also must consider the fact that men are also victims of gender-based violence. There are circumstances, and it has become a bit taboo, because there are circumstances where men would come in and they would report being victims of gender-based violence and domestic violence and so on. But they are asking not to say anything about it or not to put it out there, because as a man, you are not expected to be a victim. You are more expected to be the aggressor. And that is one of the things that, society has, gone into believing, that it's more about the women being the victims, but men are also victims. So it's mostly, the stronger or the aggressor. It's not about persons, of equal ability or fair matchups. The stronger versus the weaker, male versus female, or female versus male. So it's very disproportionate when it comes to gender-based violence and domestic violence, speaking in general terms. Yeah?
I want to agree with my colleagues on their definitions or aspects of gender-based violence that they have shared. It is about power and control. At the end of it, it's one person exerting power and wanting to control another person based on their gender. And here, in this sense, we're talking about gender inequality. And that is the crux of it. And so because of that, it becomes power control. We've seen it as gender-based violence because I feel I have more power over you. I feel I have more strength than you. I exert power over you. And so in our parts of the world, we don't even need to go as far as India. It happens, and patriarchy is real in the Caribbean, real in Trinidad and Tobago, because a lot of women are getting killed. A lot of women are being thrown with acid or being chopped up based on the fact that they are women. And because also men feel that the men who perpetrate this violence feel that they can exert power over them. And one thing I love about, using the term survivor instead of victim is that, yes, we know that a victim would have experienced, some sort of trauma, or somebody who is, going through something. But when you say somebody is a survivor, that means that the person has actually lived through a traumatic experience and is still alive, or they're going through it. And that is what many of these women are, survivors. As Mauriska was sharing, you know, in the film, the lady tried to look okay, go about their business. And many of us work with men and women, you know, especially a lot of women who come to work, but are going through this, but we don't know. It's like the silent killer, they're just surviving it. And so for me, the basics of gender-based violence is all the aspects that my colleagues have spoken about, but we cannot forget the aspect of power and control, and also looking at it from as a gender inequality issue.
Yes, thank you for that, panelists. I want to make sure that we pay attention to certain aspects of what we're discussing this evening. And one of the aspects I think that we want to walk away with in what gender-based violence is, or what it can constitute, it is the idea of power and control, inequality, and the fact that one person does not have the power while another person has all the power or most of the power. So we're dealing with an unequal power dynamic and the desire to control a person and a situation. And when you think about that, you know, Officer Mills brought up an issue that we don't talk about a lot, and not just that men experience gender-based violence, but what we want to discuss is who else is affected, because sometimes we do look at, you know, it's just the woman, you know, this is a singular situation, she's the only one experiencing this issue and being affected by it. But we want to just look for a minute at all the players in the situation, not just the perpetrator and survivor victim, but we want to look at the other players, because this affects our community. And I just want to hear from the panelists in terms of the effects on the community. This is not a singular problem. This is something that it seeps into every area of our lives.
That is correct. Yeah. And you know, as was said earlier, I would have started working at the Child Protection Unit before that said unit became a part of the Gender-Based Violence Unit. And what we have discovered is that the children, you know, when there are children involved in a situation where, you know, the parents are, well, a parent, for want of a better term, might be a victim of gender-based violence or of domestic violence, the children tend to suffer the most. And what has been happening is that children, because, you know, of what they believe within the home and the discussions that they are having within the home, they would not say anything about it, but it affects them, you know, directly and indirectly. And they would go to school, they would go to the playground, they would go to the parks, they would go out, and the effect that it is having on the children would manifest, you know, among their peers. They would start exhibiting certain types of behaviors within the school system, within the classroom. They would start being aggressors themselves, you know, and reports would be made. And it is only when the police get involved and we ask the question and we delve deep into the situation, we recognize that, listen, these children are victims of domestic violence, and more than that, their parents, the mother or the father, is actually victims of domestic violence within the home. So we would have to treat with the entire family now, as opposed to just treating with the child. So I want us to talk about or focus on the children within these homes that actually suffer the most. Some of these children, when we go to the homes, we have to take them away from the home, save them from the situation. Sometimes they are in imminent danger of the violence that takes place within the home, you know? So it's a real situation, and we have to really look at it from all angles, more so the children that are involved in these situations within these homes. Yeah?
Well, if I want to, go ahead.
Apart from just women, I would say that even co-workers are also affected when their co-worker is experiencing domestic violence, with the way that they may, well, their performance at work, it may decrease. When the performance at work decreases, that also impacts the company or the businesses, right? Where it
Yeah.
is you may not come to work with the best attitude, you may not interact well with the other staff members. That in itself, you're bringing a kind of, what to say, a cloud in the workplace because of what is happening to you. It may not be intentional, but it's happening because a situation is happening. So if you interact negatively with your customers, it also impacts the business as well. So it's not an individual problem. Yes, it's happening to one person, but like you said previously, the community and people in the workplace are a part of the community. They assist, and they can only assist you in your situation if they know what is happening with you, if they're able to identify the signs. Because as previously said, a lot of people are walking around looking quite normal. We're going to work, we're getting up, we're trying to function as normal as possible. But you can see little cracks when we have to speak to someone or when we have to react to a certain situation. We may not react as fast or we may not react the best. So you may shout at somebody and everybody has to be like, why are you behaving like that? It's not because you're angry with the person or anything, but you have an underlying issue that you're dealing with and you are venting in an inappropriate way. So the workplace is also affected by an individual going through gender-based violence.
I just want to say thank you for sharing that. Yes, it's not just the individual that is going through the abuse that is affected. It affects the home, including the children, and even extended family. Because many a time when these cases do occur and eventually lead to death, you would hear the aunt, the grandmother, the neighbor saying, we used to hear noises, or we told them to leave, but they didn't leave. So obviously it affects them. But another area which it affects is national development, because taxpayers' money goes into the health costs, goes into paying victim support units. We actually have to set up a unit for gender-based violence. We also have to look at these specialized services such as support care, be it for Ministry of Social Transformation that has to give special attention to the women who are survivors. The cost that goes into setting up a shelter, providing these women with the support, the cost of child protection and family services that the survivors' children have to go through. And so it is not only just personal cost to the survivor itself, but also national cost, which gives our GDP a lower value, because here we are expending currency, expending monies to address gender-based violence, because it is such a big problem across the region. And so I would move it from beyond the home to even affecting the state and national development. And I believe Trinidad and Tobago is actually working on the economic cost of violence against women. I'm sure the report will come out very soon, where we will see how violence against women really affects our GDP and national development.
That is an extremely important point. And not that we're looking at cost or money being more important than the trauma to a human being. But when we look at it from a dollar perspective, now we get to see the bigger picture, what's happening, because once it affects the money of the country, it also affects what the country can do in terms of development, in terms of where they have to spend their money. And now we have to look at remedial care. How are we going to fix and help and support victims, and even the victims/survivors, not just them, but the extended family, their children? How are we now going to support them? And I am sure that Officer Mills sees that firsthand in terms of the people coming in and reporting and trying to get them the help that they need. and Mauriska from a conflict resolution point of view in terms of having to now, speak to people about how we're going to navigate issues that may be triggering to us. We want to talk about domestic violence. We don't want to leave out the, who it affects and who it infects, right? Because this is something that's going to grow with the community and grow with the children. And we're looking at the economic aspect of it. But we also want to talk about some of the forms domestic violence takes, right? We want to look at it because once you are able to articulate it, now we can look for it in our environment. Now we can pay attention to what's happening and what we need to do in terms of stopping it. We want to identify it first. So I just want to open the floor to the panelists. Could you all talk to us a bit about some of the various forms of domestic violence? Because it's not only, physical blows a person. What are some of the forms that you all are seeing for domestic violence?
Yes, of course. Sorry. All right. Well, from a legal perspective and within the ambit of the law and so on, the Domestic Violence Act, it demonstrates or depicts the meaning of domestic violence. And it says that domestic violence actually includes several areas. For example, there's sexual abuse, there's psychological abuse, there's the whole physical aspect of physical abuse. There's emotional abuse. Emotional abuse, you're using disrespectful language, obscene language. You are attacking, with the use of words, the victim. You're telling them all sorts of things, the name calling, right? Sexual abuse, persons taking or causing or forcing victims to engage in certain sexual acts, even though they might be, or they will be, or they are against or not willing to take part in these acts. They are being forced to take part in these sexual acts and so on. There's financial abuse as well, where the perpetrator, or as the law refers to them as the respondents, they would withhold money. And, the whole issue of control, all of this has to do with controlling the other party. So you would withhold money, you would withhold finances and so on. And so domestic violence actually is a broad umbrella that encompasses so much. And there's so many instances where a person can be found guilty, or of allegedly perpetrating the act of domestic violence against a victim by, just by mere actions or mere words or mere inactions or, lack of taking certain actions, and this is all within the ambit of the law and so on. So domestic violence is wide and it encompasses a lot in terms of what a person can do to perpetrate the act of domestic violence. So it's not only physical, yeah?
One thing I want to highlight from the sexual abuse part is that even though, because a lot of persons would say, but you all are married. So if you all are married and you all have sex, that it's legal. Like, it can't be illegal. But if it's against your will, just like the officer said, there's something called marital rape. So under the umbrella of gender-based violence, you are in the home, you are married, and it's something that's seen as consensual, normal activities. But once, even though you're married, even though you're married, once as you are not willing to do the activity, I think it's good that people are aware that, marital rape can happen. Yeah. Just as financial is where it is, as the officer would have said, where the victim is now not allowed to meet their basic needs, so normal toiletries, things that you need on a daily basis. The perpetrator takes away your means of procuring those items, whether they stop you from working or they cause you to get fired from your job, by going around, and they may start to spread rumors, things like that and cause you to get fired. A number of things persons would do when they are in the quest of abuse, when they are doing it and their intent that you should feel their quote unquote wrath. They do so
Yeah,
many different things and it affects you in so many different ways.
that is correct. And just to touch back a bit on the whole aspect of the sexual abuse, there's a lot of persons that are unaware that even though okay, let's say a husband and a wife, and the wife would have consented in the initial stages to the sexual act and so on. But if during the midst of the act she says no or stop, if the husband refuses to stop, it becomes illegal, and he can also be charged for perpetrating a rape against his wife. So once there's the whole aspect of no at any time before or during, the other party must respect and accede to the wishes of the victim or the person that is saying no. So we must make that known and make persons to become fully aware that it is very, very easy to perpetrate, domestic violence in relation to that whole issue of sexual, the sexual act and sexual involvement. It is very easy. And there's a lot of persons, as my colleague Ms. Thomas would have said, they might believe, okay, we are married, so there's no choice. You are mine. I pay, sometimes they say, I pay $10 for you in the treasury or in Inland Revenue, I pay $15. And they make these kind of jokes, but they're actually serious. They believe that the person is actually their property. They own that person. They control that person. And so because of that thought, they believe that they can do whatever they want, whenever they want to that person. But this is so wrong, right? So people need to be aware, that it is wrong, and we need to really look into it and deal with it on a personal basis. Yeah.
I want to agree on that comment, that marital rape is real and it is a crime. But also sometimes, especially as we're looking at the younger generation now, to not only limit domestic violence according to the law to only physical, sexual, financial, and emotional, because the law also goes further to even say that, persistently following somebody from place to place, you can bring a charge against the person. If you're forced or confined by someone, you can bring a charge, and depriving somebody of using their own property. That is the beauty about this amendment, because the domestic violence law was amended and the legislation actually makes it clear what you can bring a charge on somebody for. And I think that if persons will take the time to look at it, if someone is depriving you of using your property, if somebody is persistently telephoning you, or your place of work or your residence, and you don't want it, in some places they'll call it, they're stalking you, you can bring a charge against these persons. So apart from the areas that they've mentioned, I just wanted to highlight those as well, that these are also real forms of domestic violence that persons can be abused of, and they can bring charges against their perpetrators who exhibit these traits.
Those points are so salient. I just want us to pause here for a minute and just recap. So we are seeing that some of the forms of domestic violence can be, inaction, as Officer Mill said, as well as an action, not respecting when a person is saying no when it comes to sexual interaction. If even in a marriage, the person says no, before or during, that person can bring charges against the other person if they don't respect the no even before, during, and in a marriage. So I want to make sure we remember those things and the financial aspect of it as well, because some persons don't know, as Officer Mills pointed out, right? They're not aware that marital rape is on the books. And perhaps we can do a part 2 where we look at the law, at what the amendments, as Nana is bringing to us, what the amendments may be in terms of what is not allowed, so that you know what your rights are and how you can stand up for yourself, right? Because as she pointed out as well, it's not just that, you know, you're a victim, you went through this, you can survive this. And part of the survival process for many people is facing the perpetrator and bringing them to justice, making them have to feel the consequences of their actions. And I like that. Officer Mills, I've never heard that one before. I paid $10 at the registry for you. That's a new one.
Yes,
That's
yes, it's real, it's real. We hear it all the time. Person even in interviewing would be put or alleged perpetrators. But officer, I paid $10 for she. That is mine. She belongs to me. You know, you would hear these comments. And these comments have been made in ignorance. You know, they actually believe that, you know, a person can be owned. And it's really interesting to see how people think. And when you see how they think, you will understand, okay, why, or one of the reasons, one of the things that form the basis for the whole perpetrating of domestic violence, you know, the whole assault and so on, and all the other areas of violence that take place within the home is based on how these perpetrators think and what they believe. You know, so it's really, really interesting talking to these people, listening to how they think, things they do, and why they say the things that they say. So it's really interesting.
Yes. And I really think I'm going to return to that point you brought up, Inspector Mills, which we're looking at motivations and intentions, why domestic violence is being perpetrated, because it plays a very important role in the solution, right? And we want to look at that before we close off. So I want to just bring to the fore, I just want to read some statistics that the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service had put out for 2022. And they were comparing pre and post COVID. Well, we say post, you know, quote unquote, because we're still living it. So they were comparing the pre and during COVID figures in terms of domestic violence. And I'm just going to read these statistics here. So March 2018 to March 2020, there were 2,710 domestic violence cases reported. However, for the period of March 2020 to March 2022, the figures rose significantly by 230% to 6,250 reports. So during the COVID period, we went from 2,710 domestic violence case reports to 6,250 reports in Trinidad and Tobago. And just to break that down a little further, we have that Trinidad and Tobago is divided into 9 districts according to the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service report. And those 9 districts, out of those 9 districts, we had in Tobago, and I'm focusing there because we know that Tobago's population, if we're looking at compared to different areas in the different districts, we know that Tobago has a small population compared, and Tobago ranked 3rd with a number 848 reports coming out of Tobago, out of the 9 districts. So out of the 9 districts, Tobago ranked 3rd, and I'm not saying that to point them out like this, but I'm just pointing out how pervasive and prevalent this problem is. We need to take a serious look at domestic violence and what's happening in Trinidad and Tobago. And as we're discussing it, it is a real issue. And we want to make sure that people understand the gravity of what's happening. So we just want to quickly go into a discussion about COVID. We have domestic violence and gender-based violence has a context to it. It changes form and shape depending on what's happening with a community, with a country. We're talking about the digital age, and now part of gender-based violence is people putting pictures, intimate photos that they've taken with or without the consent of their partner on, for sharing, to embarrass and to cause shame and so on. And we want to talk about, what is happening with COVID, how it's the context and the numbers and the effect, how it has been exacerbated during COVID. So I'm opening the floor to the panelists first to talk about the effect that COVID has had on the issue of gender-based violence.
One aspect would be when we had lockdowns and persons had to stay confined to their houses, being in that confined space with your spouse. Let's say you all would have already been experiencing intimate partner violence. Now the fact that the person perpetrating the violence cannot leave, they now find you as more of a target. So they vent their anger or their issues onto you more now, because there isn't an avenue, such as like before them, let's say maybe they would have gone to the rum shop, or they would have gone to play football, or gone to hang out with friends. Because of the restrictions, they are quote unquote cooped up at home. So there is no other avenue for them to let out that extra stress or worries. So now, instead of it being outside, they are now targeting you, right? And you also are confined to the home, so you can't leave. You can't go to a therapist's office as you would have done previously. You can't visit your friends, you can't have a break from the abuse. So now he's here or you here, depending on whoever is the aggressor, you all are both confined to this space. So, and in some cases, even if abuse was not happening before, during the lockdown, some persons will have started to learn their partner, whereas before they were able to leave, just say good morning, good night, that kind of thing, and leave and go about your own business. During the lockdown, you were forced to have to interact with this person. And in some cases, the abuse would have started then. Yeah.
Remember, we are dealing with a situation that is fueled by gender inequality, by power and control in a very toxic patriarchal environment. And so COVID brought a lot of job losses to many homes. And so for some people, what used to be their power no longer became their power. And so other forms of power had to be demonstrated. These are one of the areas in which gender-based violence saw the soaring figures, as we can see. And just as Mauriska was saying, people were now forced to remain at home. And so where probably, I don't believe personally that 50% new cases of gender-based violence evolved over COVID. I believe, and I would like to propose, that it was gender-based violence that existed already. But of course, now we are living in a confined situation. And so it had to rear its ugly head in the worst forms ever. And that is what we saw. And then, of course, now with the advocacy being more vocal, persons are now reporting more than they used to. And so while there might be some new cases, I don't disagree with that, but I don't think majority of the cases that we saw were new cases, were probably cases that were already there, but were just exacerbated because of the COVID and the lockdown situation, the loss of employment, the stresses of life that brought on many, forms of challenges to families. This is what I believe happened. And as she rightly said, avenues that persons were used to getting or could have sought, counseling was no longer an essential service. The essential service were the groceries, the doctors, the health, unless it was serious that it required injury, then you could have sought that help.
Sister Nana, you said something there that I do believe I want to just, stick a pin and excavate for a minute. When the lockdown was in full effect, you could get a pass to go do certain activities, right? Outside of the curfew hours, you could get a pass if you had to go to work, if you had to go to, the hospital, if it was what they deemed an emergency. But as you're rightfully saying, a therapist or, a support system was not, as far as I can recall, listed as an essential service, as something that you needed a pass for. So perhaps even then, we could have been looking at, what exactly is an emergency, right? And I think you're very right in excavating that for a minute for us. What exactly do we look at as a community as being essential and important, and what should we be focusing our dollars and cents on, right? Instead of simply just looking at, the physical doctors and, the hospitals and all that. We need to be looking at the mental effects, right? How people are dealing and coping mentally with a lot of things, and making sure that we have enough support and help out there. So thank you very much for that. Officer Mills, I just want for a minute to ask you from your perspective with the Tobago division, and we're not singling out Tobago. I live in Tobago, so it's always of interest to me. I just want to get some perspective from you. What is happening, not just in Tobago, but what is happening with Trinidad and Tobago in terms of our numbers, in terms of what happened? Did you see an escalation in terms of the reporting, as the numbers were saying, in your police station, in your everyday life as a police officer?
Yes, of course. With the advent of COVID and so on, at the gender-based violence unit, we have two offices, one located at the Chauvin Road Police Station, and one is located at the Roxborough Police Station. And at both offices, we have seen an increase with the advent of the COVID-19 pandemic in reports, involving gender-based violence. But more than that, and let's consider this, when we would have, interviewed the victims and so on during reports, one thing, there's a recurring decimal in that persons are saying, officer, I never knew my wife was like this. Officer, I never knew my husband was like this. You see, we have to look at the fact that persons might be married for quite some time, for years, but never really spent a full day and night together in the same space. So with COVID now and with the whole lockdown situation, we have seen persons actually becoming, shocked, flabbergasted, confused, that their wives, their spouses, their husbands have been displaying, attitudes that they have never, experienced or been a part of, that they are unable to comprehend. That, coupled with the whole issue of frustration, loss of jobs, as was mentioned before, and so on, persons' fuse became very short. And, tempers started flaring and so on, and the reports just started coming into our office. Persons were calling the police just for a simple argument. Come and put peace in the home. Come and talk to my husband. Come and talk to my wife. We're not able to come to some common ground on a discussion that we're having. And when the report is made, we have to log it. We have to put it in the statistics once we respond to a home or respond to a report within the home. It doesn't matter how simple or how trivial or how serious it is. Once we respond, we have to log it in our registers because the law says so. And so you might find, reports are coming in and the numbers are going up with domestic violence reports. But sometimes it's not really domestic violence. People are just looking to the police, looking for a third party, just to put peace, just to, be able to say something in the presence of a third party, because if there's not a third party, it will deteriorate into an argument and it might even go further. But we really have been seeing increases happening within the division, especially within the eastern side of Tobago. And of late, we are seeing it happening now in the western end of Tobago. Even though the numbers and the country, we can say, has more or less returned to some sort of normalcy, the reports are still coming in. As a matter of fact, basically every day we would have at least 2, 3, 4 reports in both areas, both districts, East and Scarborough, of domestic violence. So yeah, the reports are coming in and they are continuously coming in. Persons are seeking help, persons are seeking assistance, children are being affected, even children are making reports in Tobago. So there is a need to really look into it, in depth and see what can happen. Let's get our stakeholders involved and so on. Let's see what can happen in terms of trying to reverse this whole pandemic within a pandemic, as I would call it, the whole pandemic of domestic violence and gender-based violence in Tobago, and by extension, Trinidad.
Well, I think what we're taking away, well, I'm certainly going to be taking this away, the pandemic in the pandemic. And we're looking at, as Officer Mills is talking about, he's looking at the pandemic of gender-based violence. Of course, we know, it's not a disease, it's not really catching, but if you don't have a proper handle on your mental state, on your perspective of ownership, control, what is mine, who is mine, this is my property, and wanting to exert. If you don't have a handle and an understanding that that is not, right, human beings are not property, those are some things that can escalate and certainly lead you down a path towards becoming a perpetrator of gender-based violence. Before we close, right, because we're past our time, but I just want us to look at 2 more topics or questions rather. And one of those is the issue or topic of allyship in domestic violence and eradicating it, in stemming the flow, as well as what your role can be in stopping gender-based violence from happening around you, to people close to you in the community. How can you support and help and lead us to a place where, when we look at in 2030, we can say gender-based violence is no longer an issue. So we want to look at allyship. And just to be clear, when we speak of allyship, we're looking at pulling on the help and assistance in affirming that gender-based violence is not going to be tolerated and should not be existing in our communities, from what we would look at as persons who are not affected by the gender-based violence. And we're looking at men. So when we talk about gender-based violence and allyship, we're looking at men standing up with women and talking about this issue of gender-based violence, looking to eradicate it. So we want to look at allyship, and we also want to discuss the solutions, how you can be a part of the solution to end gender-based violence. To open the floor before we close off for those 2 topics.
All right. I think in the case of men being allies to the situation of gender-based violence is that they can hold their friends or persons that they see, engaging in these acts, hold them accountable, have a conversation, ask questions like, why are you doing this? What is the actual reasoning behind it? What would you actually get from doing this? to your partner or to this person, you know, have the perpetrator answer some questions, because I believe that within answering questions, you are able to actually understand the reasoning behind things for yourself. Because even if persons on the outside might see something, you within yourself thinking about the situation, you might be able to say, for real, why am I doing this? Or you might be able to say, you know, I think it's connected to something that happened to me before. Maybe I should work on this particular thing or that particular thing, you know? So if it is that men could choose to, not just men, but even women, you know, put the aggressor in the situation, right? As long as they are able to hold themselves accountable, hold your friends accountable for what they do, then I think that, you know, incidents can be reduced. Things, and within my scope as a conflict resolution coach, I think things like anger management seminars, which are due to start probably sometime next year, things like that to assist persons in identifying their triggers and showing them different avenues they can use to solve situations. I think basically educating individuals on what anger is, where it stems from, what they can do instead of, things like that would be able to stem the amount of abuse or the amount of violent situations that we encounter.
Yeah, I will agree that in terms of allyship, we can all be allies to the situation. But if we want men to be allies, we have to target it from the fact that they have mothers, they have sisters, they have aunties, they have grandmothers, they have cousins. This could be one of them. How would they feel if this happened to their sister or their mother or their aunt or their grandmother? If you target it from the personal, you know, not something that is far off, not something that happens to their buddy's girlfriend or their buddy's sister, but something that could happen close to home. And their daughters, you know, especially when you mention the daughters, they can't even fathom that. But we're trying to create a society where it should not happen to any of these persons. And so start having those conversations with your male friends, talking to them about creating a society where your daughters can walk free, where your sisters can be themselves and not be afraid when another guy, be it anywhere, tries to approach them in a way that they are not comfortable with. And so here, you let them see that it could come close to home. And then speaking, as Mauriska said, to them about being accountable, holding their friends accountable to it. That even when somebody starts to make some dirty jokes or some simple jokes that they think are appropriate, come to them, boy, that's not cool. That's not right. You know, it starts from there, those locker room talks. It needs to start from there. And how do we then also amplify our voices? We need to have everyone, be it at the community level, be it in the work setting, put up their leadership skills in this. Be a leader about it. Speak out about it. The legislation now gives opportunity for third-party reporting. You know, many times you hear of persons dying and you ask yourself, so nobody saw anything? Nobody heard anything? By the time the police come, somebody is dead or somebody is seriously injured, but there were neighbors around, there were family members around, but nobody said anything. And so we have to be the standalone, and sometimes it might mean that persons will not be happy with us, but would you rather know that you could have said something and saved a life, or rather kept quiet and was part of a life being lost? That's what I have to say on that. Thank you.
That is correct. You know, I'm in full agreement with my colleagues on that whole issue of allyship. And when you hear the term allyship, Well, for me, when I hear the term allyship, I'm thinking support group. You know, it is very important that, you know, within all aspects of society and all areas of society, we encourage men to form support groups. It doesn't have to be anything official, you know, anything where you have to sign up and that kind of thing. You know, just the boys on the block. Encourage the positive conversations. Encourage, you know, men respecting each other and by extension respecting our women and vice versa. And I believe when that starts to happen, we should, as a matter of fact, see a definite change in the way our men relate to our women and vice versa. We have to consider that the conversations that we are having as a people actually give way and encourage us to act based on those conversations. So Ms. Bain would have mentioned the dirty jokes, you know, and the things that we say as men, the disrespectful comments when we see a woman pass by. It all lends ear to, and it encourages us as men to act upon what is said and what we hear. So we need to really form those support groups. And that's what I hear and that's what I understand by the whole term allyship. And not only men, you know, even women, we have to start discussing with our women, how do they want to be treated? What do they want to hear coming from us men? It is important that we know, coming from the women themselves, how they want to be treated, what they want to hear. It might be difficult as men, especially if we are not in the habit of saying these things to a woman that they want to hear. But at least if we start having a conversation, that's a start, you know, and we could go from there, be stronger from there in going forward as a society. That's just my take on the whole issue of allyship and so on. And it will even assist us in putting a whole stop. Well, let me not say stop because we have to be realistic, but at least putting a form of control on the whole issue of gender-based violence and domestic violence, and minimizing not only the instances of reports, but minimizing the whole act in itself, which would lend to the reports coming in. You know, that's just how I see it basically from my end as a police officer.
You know, there's so many good points coming out of this discussion. And before we close, we just want to summarize. We want to go back over some of the things that we've heard, because we don't want you all to go away and forget. We want you to remember, we want to keep everything we're hearing in the front of mind. And we talked about what is gender-based violence. And very simply, we're looking at issues of control. We're looking at issues of unequal power, unequal situations happening, whether it be financial, whether it be physical, whether it be in the home in terms of who has the authority to say and do. We're looking at inequality in the gender dynamic, and we're looking at that issue of power, control, wanting to dominate and have ownership, as Officer Mills has brought out. We also want to make sure that we understand the different types of domestic violence. The word domestic violence, you know, there are other aspects. We look at the financial aspects of it, and Officer Mills also pointing out the action or inaction of a person can now be deemed as under the laws as domestic violence, your inability to act. And we want to also look at the fact that there is a law that covers the Domestic Violence Act, and you can get redress under the law and stand up for yourself and make sure that the perpetrator is brought to justice and that there are consequences to their actions, right? And, you know, just lastly, we want to look at solutions. We want to make sure we remember it's not a hopeless situation. As Nana pointed out, you know, she talked about the solution, the survivor, right? She talked about going through it, but coming out on the other end of it. And that's where we want our society to head. We want our society to head into a place of solution and the eventual reduction and elimination of gender-based violence. And you too, everyone here, everyone viewing, you can be part of the solution. Whether, as Mauriska said, you have to hold persons accountable, hold the men and women in your community accountable. Why are you doing this? What are you benefiting from doing something like that? Do you think that makes sense? Is that in the best interest of your family and in your best interest? We talked about respecting, Officer Mills talked about respecting yourself, respecting the women in your lives, respecting your community. And Sister Nana talked about respecting not just the community, but talking about how are we keeping people accountable for what we're doing. The locker room talks, as she named it. That is golden. That is something that we can also look at, right? In terms of making sure that people have these very, very informal conversations on a normal everyday basis. What's happening in your community and in your mind, in your family, and so on. So we want to close this evening. I want to thank the panel. I want to thank Mauriska Thomas, Sister Nana, Officer Mills. I also want to thank the actor Rene King and Aryana Mohammed, the director of the film Mangoes from the Valley, a short film looking at the effects and the consequences, issues around the topic of migration and domestic gender-based violence. And we want to thank you for tuning in, for taking time out of your schedule to tune in and understand the issues and give your points of view. Because we're over time, we're not going to do the Q&A right now. So what I want to encourage everyone to do is to use your Facebook page if you have one, or if you are on the chat right now, you can put your questions in. We are going to send them into the panel and you will get an opportunity to get a response. But if you're on Facebook, you can use the comment section and just put your questions and your comments there, how you felt about the film that you saw, how it touched you, how it moved you, what you think about the issues, how are you being affected by the issues. And I just want to put out there that on our Facebook page, CIWiLTT, and our Instagram page, we have left numbers for persons who may need support from gender-based violence support services in Trinidad and Tobago. So you can go to our Instagram and Facebook page and see some of the numbers there that may be able to, pull on and give you the help and support that you need. And of course, we want to always remember that you're not in this alone. We're in this together. We're a community. We're a regional community heading into global community, and we're here to support each other and to make sure that we head into 2030 with no gender-based violence. I just want to thank everyone again. If we have any closing remarks, opening the floor briefly to the panelists, and I just want to let you all get a chance to make your closing remarks, and then we close off for the night.
All right, so right away and off the bat, I would just like the public and our viewing and listening audience to know that the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service has adopted a zero tolerance policy on domestic violence and reports involving domestic violence. And so once these reports come into our office, we are going to conduct our inquiries and treat with each report based on its own merit. And if needs be, persons who have to go before the court, we are going to take those persons before the court. As to the full extent of the law, they are going to have to answer. Domestic violence, it needs to stop. And we within the police service are going to be doing our part to assist our women and our men to achieving a greater level of peace, safety, comfort, and security within their homes and wherever they may exist and coexist within society. So thank you very much for having me. Thank you for allowing us to be a part of this program. Very timely, very important for a time such as now. I'm really happy to be a part of this program. Thanks to everyone.
As a conflict resolution coach, I I will always say, when situations arise, there must be another way. So as much as people may be tempted to go on instinct and to lash out, think first and act after, because you don't want to end up in a situation where you regret the things that you did.
Yes, I agree with the closing statements of my colleagues and just want to add that violence against women, gender-based violence, intimate partner violence is everybody's business. We all have to see it as something that we need to work towards ending. Today is your neighbor, tomorrow it could be you. And so turning a blind eye to the situation is not helping anybody. It costs us all, it costs taxpayers money. It affects our GDP. Resources that could be used for other things are going to solve that problem. So let us work together. Let us raise our voices against it and be leaders in whatever spaces that we occupy to make sure that violence against women, gender-based violence, intimate partner violence, domestic violence comes to an end. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night, CIWiLTT.
Good night. Have a blessed night.
Bye.
Take care.
Okay,
Bye.
bye.